Hello and welcome to this edition of Secure Networks, the Endace Packet Forensic Files with your host, Michael Morris. This week's special guest is Gerard Martir from Keysight Technologies. Welcome, Gerard. Thank you for joining. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Thanks, Mike. This is a good opportunity, and thank you for this chance to talk to your audience. I'm with Keysight, as you said. I'm part of the Network Solutions team. So what I focus on is helping my customers improve their network security and their application performance monitoring. Primarily, I focus on supporting U.S. providers, service providers or carrier. That's kind of the vertical that I focus on. Been in the telecom industry for 22 years now. Let's see, I'm fascinated by history, genealogy, and I am a big foodie.
All right then. So we can have phone calls and food all in one session.
Yeah.
So Gerard, with all that experience in the telecom space, really what I wanted to learn from you today, and what our listeners would like to hear is, there's a huge shift in the IT networking security space going on due to the massive shift to remote workers. What are you seeing carriers and service providers doing to adjust for their networks and then ultimately for their customers and their service?
I'm sure this is a recurring theme that everybody has heard these past couple of months. The ongoing COVID-19 definitely has changed a lot of things. The human factor is one thing, but there's also kind of implications on economics and financial factors as well. So we're seeing two things. Like the first thing is projects are really being prioritized. So consider this as a new way, right? We all talk about the new normal. We're hearing new budget processes where the top level strategic objectives and tying that to a different budgeting process. And associating that to different functional areas. So whether that might be engineering or operations, those teams historically have been allocated budget based on their expenses from previous years. Well, that's changing now. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing. The second thing that you also hear about is 5G and edge computing. So, the 3GPP specifications kind of leads itself into more of enhanced broadband, right? And that's what you get or what you gain from 5G, the ultra low latency. So the second thing we hear is latency measurements are going to be key. Those are the types of things that service providers kind of shifting their focus.
Okay. Well, one of the things I know about you have a very unique perspective as you work with carrier customers because you engage with them both in their test lab, part of their environments, as well as their live networks and the monitoring needs they have. What are some of the different challenges carriers are facing in those different parts of the business now with all the context of what you just described?
So the biggest thing that comes to mind is the methodology of how they test. That has changed, or if you will, kind of maturing. If you look back, I guess the development model has shifted. So before it used to be any type of development was a waterfall approach, right? In the 90s, there was about 2 decades of this approach where it's very compartmentalized, right? And then you do your testing, right? Well, now with Agile, I guess this past decade, starting around 2011, then you kind of have this sprint or a little bit more focused, and you tend to not have the focus on, well, do I have time to test, right? I don't have the means or the manpower to really test as much as I could back in the early 2000s or 2010 decade. but executives do want to focus on shortening their test cycles, right? Because agile development kind of changes how software gets released. So you might have dot releases or even full-blown releases. So automation is going to be key that we're hearing, as well as machine learning. Anything to help with shortening those test cycles. And then you kind of carry that out into rolling it out into production. That's still also the need, is to be able to figure out, well, how am I going to monitor this given the pandemic situation? Are you able to put people there in locations to do any type of monitoring? So you need some sort of mechanism to be able to monitor the packets or monitor the network automatically.
Okay. Well, and Keysight is uniquely positioned to help carriers in both testing and monitoring their infrastructures. What are some of the more urgent priorities you're seeing emerge with the massive shift to remote workers as it relates to both performance and security?
What we've seen, I guess, the past couple of months, the big focus obviously is keeping employees safe, and also having the ability to support them do their work remotely, right? So whether you work in a call center or you're a support staff, right, handling the first trouble tickets that come from the field, that's the biggest priority for a lot of the service providers. To make sure that their employees are safe, and they also have the technology there able to support their customers, whether they need to get access to the network remotely, or being able to handle a round robin of calls through their call centers. That, to me, is what we're seeing as an urgent priority for the service providers.
Okay. So as part of that, what are some foundational tools and solutions you see carriers across the industry adopting to manage some of these new security and performance requirements, right? I mean, it's like you said, and I've heard many times the attack surface on the security front is just exponentially expanded, right, with so many more remote workers. But again, what are some foundational tools and solutions and components they're really embracing right now?
I think technology-wise, obviously, for the past, I guess the first half of this decade, virtualization is a big focus, right? There's a lot of focus on what network functions can be virtualized, and that changes the dynamic of how you would go about testing that, as well as monitoring it. But like with everything that's being virtualized, you also have a challenge of an ever-changing environment. Somebody who is a service provider in a different part of the world versus here in the U.S. might have a completely different approach on how they want to virtualize something. So I think the biggest challenge is where you're trying to build this foundation that you used to do in a physical environment and trying to switch over to a virtualized environment is an ongoing challenge. We see it as an ever-changing environment. Trying to be in touch with our customers and making sure we understand the requirements is important.
Yeah, absolutely. Is the upheaval from COVID-19 and the pandemic and the remote workforce driving changes to 5G rollouts that are happening, and how is Keysight helping in that area?
Yes, so it's been interesting. I just realized we're already halfway through July, and
it's Thursday, Gerard.
The first half of the year has been completely different from what we've been used to. But the theme that we keep hearing now is, the rollouts still have to continue, right? Your network build-outs still have to continue. And the recurring technology that they are really focusing on is 5G. and the rollouts will have to be able to deploy them while everybody else is still remote. You still have field teams, right?
Mm-hmm.
The field teams are out there trying to get the 5G sites ready. So as a service provider, they're going to need to measure the performance and the coverage in, the field, whether that might be a 5G standalone or a non-standalone deployment. That's still going to be a requirement, and that's still going to be part of their mandate, is to hit as many sites as they can to deploy 5G.
Okay. How do you see, and obviously a lot of our listeners aren't just in the carrier space, but how do you see the activity in carriers driving and changing the industry for other verticals, whether it be enterprise or government or retail or finance, even healthcare, right? I mean, so many issues around the healthcare space from a security point of view, and obviously with the pandemic. What do you see what carriers are doing? How do you see that mapping to those other verticals?
So I think the first one you mentioned was enterprise. And enterprise could cover, it covers, whether you're a Fortune 500 company, or you could be a small, medium business company, an SMB. And where we have seen a big focus on is service providers wanting to make sure that the SMB, the small businesses continue to thrive in this. So they're very much supportive of that, whether they get the government funding or even through celebrity drives, right, where people come on and they do concerts. So they're finding unique ways of supporting the businesses. So that's from an enterprise perspective. In the public sector, so in the government side, there's still the focus on cybersecurity, right? And I think that there's probably more opportunities to figure out how cybersecurity and supporting that the organizations, the different divisions, whether it's the armed forces or even the Department of Homeland Security, any of the critical infrastructure that's deemed, an essential business or critical infrastructure. Those are some things that carriers or service providers are trying to figure out as well and support it. I believe that healthcare, like you said, is an interesting one where service providers are looking at, okay, how do they secure? Cybersecurity is obviously important. But the biggest thing that we see is identity protection. And what they could focus on protecting the identity of the patients, and also, different healthcare providers will have their own requirements on how they protect their patients' identity. That translates from healthcare all the way up to retail. If you're doing, online shopping, you just want to make sure you're able to protect the end user's information, right? The unique thing that we're seeing as well is priority services. So you might have heard about the first responders. Obviously, the top strategic service providers here in the U.S. have either built their own network dedicated for first responders, or they have priority services. Those are the type of things that we're seeing where, taking the advantage of the new technology, whether it's 5G or edge computing, and leveraging that to be able to support the first responders. So you could see some emergency medical services to the fire department, to law enforcement. So it's been an interesting opportunity to sit and watch this space. I think there's definitely more to come in this year.
Oh, absolutely. It's I think it's absolutely just getting started and will continue to evolve on multiple fronts. So I think you're spot on that one. So Gerard, I always like to close with one kind of forecaster question, right? So you're a thought leader in the industry. What do you recommend for our listeners to think about? The one thing to look out for over the next 6 to 18 months? And obviously everything's kind of in turmoil right now, but if you're to pick kind of one thing to really keep your eye on in the ever-shifting battle for network performance and security, what might that be?
All right, so I know you know this. This is one of my favorite movies, Back to the Future. It's actually a series, right?
Right.
So the whole thing with Back to the Future and the storyline, being able to go back and see what's going on, like, that to me, and how do you apply that even in the space that we're in, network performance and security? There is an ongoing struggle on whether you should just look at metadata or actual full packet capture. And to me, the whole premise of going back to the future or being able to look back in terms of network history not only can help trend, but also look at kind of mitigation, change how you look at protecting your network or look at areas as to where you need to grow. So maybe there's an uptick in traffic in a particular location. Well, do you really need to figure out, well, do I need a full packet capture to figure that out, or can I look at metadata? Mm-hmm. And I think that the partnership that Keysight has with Endace and putting together a solution that combines the best of both worlds helps us be positioned in a better light and be able to support our customers as they go through this change. I think 5G and edge computing, there's more to come there. But I think having the ability to go back in time is going to be important. At some point in time, somebody's going to ask, what happened? Why did this fail? Or why are we growing here versus, in this one part of the country versus the other? So I love that movie. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, yeah, I do. In fact, I saw it on one of the channels the other day. I was flipping through, and I think they were having a marathon of the thing. So it was it's kind of funny you brought up that specific reference. But anyway, well, Gerard, again, thank you for taking a little bit of time to spend with us. I sure hope our listeners enjoy the insights and get value out of the insights that you shared around the carrier market. I do think the carriers are, really driving the industry in so many ways. And so, obviously my hope is to be able to share some of those things with enterprise and other verticals that may want to know what's going on in that arena. So thank you for joining. Thanks for sharing your insights on how to secure and really scale networks. I'd ask our listeners to tune in next time for another edition of the Endace Packet Forensic Files. For more information about Endace's network packet capture platform and our integrations with our Fusion technology partners like Keysight, please go to endace.com. Thank you all for listening.
Thanks, Michael.